Good morning, everyone. I am Amal Said, one of the liaisons at the Family Resource Center with Fairfax County Public Schools. We are so happy to have you today for our first webinar for the school year 24-25, 7 simple strategies for sibling support. And we are so excited to offer this webinar today with collaboration with Emily Holl, which is the director of the Sibling Support Project, the first national program dedicated to the lifelong and ever-changing concerns of millions of siblings of people with developmental and health concerns. The Sibling Support Project is a proud program of Kindring, Washington State's largest neurodevelopmental center and early support provider. Emily is a social worker, author, and a trainer, and who has provided workshops and groups for siblings and families, presented extensively on sibling issues, and conducted and published sibling research. A sibling and board member of the National Sibling Leadership Network, Emily has written about her experience in blogs, magazines, and books such as Thicker Than Water. She was a co-editor of the Sibling Survival Guide, indispensable information for adult brothers and sisters of people with disabilities, published by Woodbine House in 2014. Emily earned a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Massachusetts, a Master of Fine Arts from Columbia University, and a Master of Social Work from Hunter College at the City University of New York. We are so happy to have you today, Emily, with us, and I will turn it over to you. And please look at the chat for some with links for some information.
Thank you so much, Amal. Good morning, everyone. Thanks also to Fairfax County Public Schools for inviting me to speak this morning on siblings and some really practical everyday strategies to support your air quote other kiddos at home. I know that we have many parents here, parents of kids with support needs. And I'm guessing that most of you also have at least one other kiddo at home, probably a typically developing child. And today's talk is dedicated to helping you support them at home. And so thanks again for creating this opportunity. And thank you, Amal, for that lovely introduction. That was a mouthful. So thank you, thank you. We have about 90 minutes together, and I want to make sure that everyone is able to ask questions. So I have saved some time at the end to do some Q&A. So if you have questions that arise during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will address them at the end. I want to make sure you all have your individual questions answered. And if for some reason we don't have time to get to your question, please know that I will respond to it afterwards via email. So we will make sure that you get the information you need. All right, without further ado, I'm gonna start my presentation, 7 simple strategies for sibling support. These are tips for parents, caregivers, and professionals. I think we probably have some folks in this webinar who wear both hats as a parent and someone who works in the field of supporting children or adults with disabilities. And so all of these tips are designed for all of you. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Sibling Support Project if you're not familiar with us. First of all, we're located right outside of Seattle, Washington. If you can see my window in the background, we are 3 hours behind and it is still dark here. So I don't know how that happened. It was just summer and it was light out at this hour. So I guess fall is really upon us. We are a proud program, as Amal said, of Kindring, which is Washington State's largest neurodevelopmental center. And we're really proud of the fact that we are the first national program in the entire United States dedicated entirely to supporting siblings. Millions of them, in fact. Siblings of people with various support needs, including developmental health and mental health concerns. And, you know, we do our work in a few different ways. First of all, through education. We have several books, many of them you see there on the screen, and we are really excited and proud that our publications are not only written for siblings, but largely by siblings. And including the voices of siblings. And so We feel that that's a really important way to make information available by consulting the real experts, right? Brothers and sisters themselves. We also talk with the media every chance we get. And if you come to our website, which is siblingsupport.org, you can look at our news blog and kind of see some of the places that we've been able to share information about siblings. We also do lots of trainings, webinars, workshops like today's webinar, and we offer other kinds of direct support through Sib Shops, which we'll talk a little bit about today. I am so delighted to be here because Fairfax County Public Schools has run excellent Sib Shops for many, many years. We were just talking about this before you all joined us. I don't know how many years, but I know it's at least 10. So as we talk about sibling support strategies, and I will mention Sib Shops, which are, our answer really for the same kind of peer support that parents get from a good parent to parent program, except for it's designed for school age kids, which I think many of you are parents of school age kids. And so if you're interested in supports for your child and they're not already involved in Sib Shops at Fairfax County Public Schools, there will be information shared about how to get connected to those Sib Shops. And I think that there are incredible and such a great resource. So if you're even a little tiny bit curious, please send your kiddo to a Sib Shop. I promise you they will be eagerly asking you to return and to go back time after time. So we'll talk a little bit about Sib Shops. We also have some Facebook groups for older siblings. We have Sib Teen for the teens. We've already had a couple of questions submitted about how to support teens. I will tell you that the teens, as you probably know, they are not on the Facebook so much. So we are sort of reinventing our Sib Teen support space, and we'll talk about strategies to support teens. We also have a group called Sib 20 for siblings in their 20s, and also SibNet for adult siblings, which is our largest and longest standing group. SibNet's been around actually for as long as the internet has been. And the three different ages are really, those three different groups for three different ages reflect that, sometimes the needs and the concerns sort of evolve and change over time, which is why we have those three groups. But I will say that SibNet is definitely our not only largest, longest standing, but most active group. And so if you are an adult sibling, if you know adult siblings, please share those resources. They're totally free, 24/7 support. So that's a little bit about the work that we do. And I want to show you a 2-minute video to further introduce us before we launch into our discussion. So here we go.
At the Sibling Support Project, we believe that every sibling deserves to have access to information and support that empower them to care not only for their families, but also for themselves. The first time I had really the privilege of co-facilitating a Sib Shop, I thought back to my own childhood and thought about how lucky I would have been to have had the opportunity to meet other brothers and sisters of kids with disabilities. I marveled at the opportunity that these kids had to meet each other, to talk about the ups and downs of having a sibling who is considered to be different by society.
Sib Shops got their start in 1982. We had an immodest goal of making Sib Shops as available as parent-to-parent programs are for parents. And with 550 Sib Shops in almost 20 countries, I think we're doing a pretty good job of that.
The secret sauce of Sib Shops is information and support in a highly recreational setting.
Play does a remarkable job of bringing kids together. When it's time to sit down and talk, they're more likely to want to talk because all these barriers have been broken down with the playful activities they've been engaging in.
There's an unspoken connection that you see on their faces, that you hear in their stories, and you see them nodding and acknowledging each other's experiences, and that That really is the greatest joy of the work that we do.
If we support young sibs, validate them, inform them, heck, celebrate them, we increase the chances that they will elect to remain lovingly involved in the lives of their brothers and sisters when their parents no longer can.
Siblings really are the next generation of caregivers. They say it takes a village, and when it comes to supporting a person with a disability, that's really very true.
All right, so that is a little bit about the Sibling Support Project and SIB shops. I promised you some information about SIB shops, and as we said in the video, SIB shops are the sort of basic recipe is information about the disability or the health concern, support, peer support, and of course, fun. You know, SIB shops center around play because we're working with kids, and that's really, really important. But I want to take a step back before we sort of jump into how to support siblings and our 7 simple strategies. I want to talk a little bit about why it's important to support brothers and sisters. If we think about the traditional family support services, maybe services that some of you are already utilizing for your kiddo with a disability, when we think about that category of family support, if you look at what's really available for services and supports, I think you might agree that the definition of family support in most cases really kind of refers to parent support, right? If you look at the programs and the opportunities, and I think that's amazing. I think that's wonderful because as a parent in general, I know we could use all the support we can get, right? Becoming a parent doesn't come with a manual, right? And so parent support is really, really, really important. We also know from the research and from our own experiences working with siblings that sibling experiences really do parallel parent experiences. We know that pretty much anything that we can say about being a parent of a child with support needs, we can put ditto marks on for siblings, right? But again, when we think about the services and supports that are available for siblings, as opposed to the services and supports that are available for parents, pretty easy to see who's getting the short end of the stick, right? And we really make it our mission to advocate for siblings and to help people understand why it's so important to support siblings. Not only how we do that through SIB shops and other things, but why that's so important. And for most of you who are parents, you probably know a lot of these whys already because you live it, you're experiencing it. But I will tell you that for many service providers, it's not something that is top of mind, right? There might be a recognition that, oh, maybe this is somehow affecting the sibling, but we're not going to dig too deeply into that. So we want to bring to surface all of the important reasons why it's important, right? To make sure that when we are talking about family support, we're including siblings in that definition of family. The second reason that we think it's really important to support siblings is that we know that sibling issues are lifespan issues. In most cases, these brothers and sisters are going to be in the lives of the person with a disability longer than anyone. Certainly longer than any special education teacher or service provider. And, you know, in many cases, probably longer even than parents. This is a relationship that can easily exceed 7 decades, which is a long time. So, sibling issues are lifespan issues. We know that preschoolers who are siblings have some unique concerns. We know that teens who are siblings have some unique concerns. We know that senior citizens who are siblings have some unique concerns, right? And that those concerns, we can see how they evolve and change over the course of the lifespan of the individual and the family. And so we want to make sure that we're taking a holistic approach to sibling support. The third reason we think it's really, really crucial to support siblings is that we know that siblings spend quantity time. We know this from the research. A team of researchers actually from Vanderbilt University in 2017, they did this giant literature review of all the sibling research that had been done in the previous 40 years. And one of the things they noted, not just for siblings of people with disabilities, but for all siblings, is that siblings have a high level of involvement in each other's lives throughout the course of the lifespan. Primarily when they're young, so maybe ages 0 to 18, kind of makes sense when they're probably living under the same roof, maybe attending the same school, going to the same church or temple, right? And then again, towards the later stages of life, there's a high level of involvement for siblings. Maybe they're coming together to support an aging parent, or maybe they're helping each other with their own health issues as they age, right? So over the course of the lifespan, siblings spend a good deal of time together, and that's all siblings. The fourth reason it's so important to think about brothers and sisters is that it's not just a good amount of time, but it's really important quality time that siblings spend together. Now, we could do a whole webinar on inclusion and inclusive classrooms. We don't have time for that today. Maybe that will be a future topic of a webinar that you all attend. But for now, let's just say that I am a fan of inclusion and inclusive classrooms if they are supported correctly. That's the big if, right? But I will tell you that no child in an inclusive classroom, no classmate, will have as great an impact on the social development of a child with a disability as his or her brothers and sisters, right? Siblings are 24/7 social models without even trying, simply because they exist in the same space, right? So that's a really, really important role. And then last but not least, something that policymakers and public officials are recognizing, service providers for sure, and of course, families. Families of adults are recognizing that siblings are becoming the next generation of caregivers, right? That long after our favorite special education teacher has retired and mom and dad are no longer available or able to care for that person, it's really brothers and sisters who often step into that role of supporting the person with a disability. Yet, I can tell you from personal experience and as a sibling myself, and also as someone who regularly checks in to our online groups to kind of take the pulse of what people are talking about, I will tell you that many adult siblings feel woefully unprepared to step in as caregivers because there has not been a lot of conversation and communication around planning for the future with parents. And so that's one thing that I want to share with you today, even those of you who have young kiddos, and I know some of you have kids who aren't even school age yet, to think about planning for the future. And when you have a small child, you know, the future really is maybe next week, maybe it's starting a new school next year, maybe it's starting a new school year. I know you guys are about 2 weeks into your new school year. I hope it's going great. We just started here this week. But including siblings, if not in IEP meetings, right? That's kind of a radical stance we sometimes take, but making sure that siblings are part of the discussions at those key transition points, right? Oh, your brother's going to a new school next year. What do you think it's important for his teachers to know? Siblings have really a unique perspective on their brothers and sisters' abilities and know their brothers and sisters in ways that sometimes even parents don't. So they're really valuable people to have their, bye honey, off to school. See, told you. They're really valuable people to have in the room in terms of sharing their perspective, but also helping them feel part of the process and included, right? And we'll talk more about that. because I want to just share with you some of the unique concerns that siblings experience and silver linings, some of the unique opportunities. Because as parents, you know that having a child with a disability is not all one or all the other, right? It is not all challenges and concerns. There are many silver linings, and there are considerations that we need to make that other parents maybe don't. So I want to talk about the good stuff and the not so good stuff, right? Because I think it's really important to emphasize that just like your parent experience is not all one thing, life for any of us is not all one thing, right? It's kind of a mix of many different things. So is the sibling experience, right? It is a mix of challenges, but also many, many tremendous rewards. And I want to emphasize that in Sib Shops, we really have designed Sib Shops to take a wellness approach and a strengths-based approach so that we are providing opportunities for kids to talk about maybe some of the challenges they experience having a brother or sister with a disability, but also to celebrate the good stuff, right? And there's so much good stuff that I can talk about as a sibling, and that we hear all the time in Sib Shops around the world, all of the things to celebrate. So let's start with the concerns. Okay, I've trained my children well. When I ask them now, do you want the good news first or the bad news? They always say the bad news. Let's get the bad news out of the way. So I'm going to start with that approach today. We're going to start with siblings' unique concerns. And I'm going to go over these really quickly just because we have limited time. I will say that when we do our Sib Shop facilitator training, so when we train new facilitators, like the ones you have at Fairfax County Public Schools, we do a whole half day dedicated to talking about these unique concerns and why it's important to notice them and how to respond to them. And for parents, I think it's equally important to recognize that these are some common themes that come up for siblings, not for every kiddo, right? You might not see your kiddo in every one of these bullets, but these are things that come up frequently enough for enough siblings that we do notice those patterns and those trends, okay? So I do want to talk about the need for information. That is probably the number one way that the sibling experience parallels the parent experience. That siblings need to have information about their brothers and sisters' disabilities. You as parents have access to doctors, clinicians, social workers, therapists, a host of professionals who can inform you about your child's diagnosis, disability, condition, right? There's also Google. Sometimes people, when I say, where do parents get information from? And they say Google first, it makes me a little nervous because, you have to really consider your source when you're looking things up online. But as parents, you have access to really sound information about your child's disability, even if the answer is, we don't know yet. We need to learn more. We're researching this. We need to do some more tests. We need to do some more assessments, right? But you have regular contact with the experts who are able to have those exchanges with you. But think about where siblings get their information from. If they're lucky, they're getting their information from you. So think about how you've talked with your other child about your kiddo's disability or diagnosis or condition. What have those conversations been? Have there been conversations? How is your other kiddo, your typically developing kiddo, receiving information about what's going on with their brother or sister? And I will tell you that many parents do not talk openly and share information with their other kiddos for the best and most loving reasons. They don't want to worry their child. They don't want to burden their child. They don't want to confuse their child, especially if we're not really sure exactly of what a diagnosis might be, right? We don't want to confuse them. But the truth is that a disability happens to not just one person in the family. This is something that is experienced by everyone in the family, and maybe a slightly different way. But by not acknowledging that and not talking about it, we are unintentionally sending a message that this topic is off limits. This is taboo. This is not good. We can't talk about this, right? It's not okay to ask questions about it. And children will have questions. Preschool age children, for example, preschool age children, think about this. They create an understanding of the world based on what they can observe, based on what they can see. So based on behaviors and routines, right? And so, for a 4-year-old, her definition of cerebral palsy might be, well, this person comes to our house twice a week and brings a giant ball, and my sister gets to roll around on the ball and learn how to walk. And for a 4-year-old, that might not be a terrible definition to start with, right? It's something that you can build upon, something that your child is observing, and it's something that you can build upon as their understanding of the world becomes a little bit more sophisticated. School age kids, boy, do they need language. They need language to be able to answer their own questions about what's going on with their brother or sister. And maybe even more importantly, to answer the questions of other kids who might not ask those questions in the kindest of ways. I remember growing up, I heard often, what is wrong with your brother? Is the same thing wrong with you? Ouch, right? It can be very empowering for a child to say, well, actually, my brother has a disability, and it just means that his brain works a little bit differently and he learns differently. End of story. Or whatever the words are to describe what that disability looks like or how it presents. That's enough to end a conversation and move on. Teens and adults need information about future planning. Adult siblings need to have access to the service system, to other siblings. The need for information is a lifelong concern for siblings. So I always start with that, and I emphasize how important it is. We dedicate a whole chapter to this topic in our SibShops curriculum in our book because it's that important. Over-identification, some of you might be familiar with this, a child feeling like, oh, do I have the same thing that my sib has? If my sibling is on the autism spectrum and I'm having, a little bit of social anxiety, or if I'm feeling like, oh, maybe that was like a little bit awkward, or, is that a sign that I have the same thing that my brother or sister has? Isolation, I think many of you parents can relate to this, the feeling that suddenly your experience is not like the experience of your friends, your peers, feeling like maybe you're the only person in the world who can understand what it's like to live with and love a person with disabilities. Isolation from the general community. Siblings also experience all of those forms of isolation, right? Suddenly you're part of this club that, first of all, you didn't know existed. You're not sure you want to be part of, and you're not even sure if anyone else, is it a club? Is there anyone else here with me, right? Those can be very, very uncertain and isolating feelings. Increased caregiving, and I know we've had some questions about this. We do know that many siblings take on responsibilities caring for their brothers and sisters, whether it's, I was just talking not long ago with a sibling who said, oh, I was basically, I could change a feeding tube by the time I was 12, because that's how my brother ate. And I had to help out. Or maybe might even be babysitting, right? Or caring for the child if mom or dad or caregiver needs to run out to the store for a half hour. Who's the person who's going to look after the kiddo with a disability? Not always easy to find a babysitter, right? Who's gonna be able to really manage the care of a kiddo who has a disability, depending on what that disability is. So many siblings take on that increased responsibility. Resentment, we could do a whole session on this. And some of you probably have recognized that there can be jealousy, that the sibling, that the child with a disability gets more time and attention, right? That more family resources are kind of locked up in that child. Our ability as a family to do things like to go out to a restaurant or to a store or on a vacation, right? These are all sort of driven by the needs of the child with a disability, what we can and can't do. It's natural that when family life seems to revolve around one person, the other people in the family might resent it just a little bit. The other interesting way that resentment plays a role for siblings is that siblings can become very resentful when there are unequal expectations of behaviors and responsibilities around the house, chores, and also consequences, right? And so the siblings who actually say, you know what, we fared pretty well in this. I'll give you like a little, we'll sneak in a little tip early. Siblings who say, well, you know what, my parents did two really important things that helped in this department so that I didn't feel so resentful. One thing is that family life revolves around something other than the disability, right? Maybe it's you are cheering for a local football team, right? Football season is starting, or you enjoy camping or music or art, right? There's something, or maybe it's, you know, being part of a church or a temple, but it's something that brings you together as a family, including the person with a disability, but it's not about the disability. And then the other thing that siblings say that their parents did really well in this department is that they set equal expectations to the greatest extent possible. Everyone had a chore. Everyone had to do something around the house, you know, based on their ability. And also everyone was expected to have the same behaviors or the standards of behavior. For example, you know, nobody in our house calls anyone else a jerk, right? And if they do, there's going to be a consequence for that for everyone, right? Disability or no disability. So that's just two little extra bonus tips to help out with resentment. Embarrassment. I think this is one of the hardest ones for parents to witness and to experience, that when their other kiddo feels embarrassed by their brother or sister. And of course, it's, I think, completely understandable that our other kiddos would be embarrassed by the maybe socially unexpected behaviors of their brothers and sisters, right? Especially those tweens, you know, as they're I have a 12-year-old, and boy, I mean, that's just the time when they just want to be like everyone else, right? That's kind of starting. And so to get that kind of unwanted attention, you know, because of your brother or sister can be really embarrassing. And, you know, the great thing about embarrassment is that it's a phase that does pass. And we do adult sibling panels all the time as part of our trainings. And we hear from adult siblings who can look back upon really embarrassing experiences and laugh about them now, you know, and say like, oh, when that happened, I wanted to fall through the floor, but now I can kind of see how funny it was. So the good news is this too shall pass. Guilt, I feel like we could do a whole training on guilt. We won't, but we could, because siblings, I think, like parents, feel guilty in many different ways. In ways that are similar to parents and also a little bit unique. So first of all, survivor's guilt, right? Why my sib? Why not me? Oh, my sib's such a sweet kid. Why does she have to have all these seizures, right? She doesn't deserve that. Guilt over conflicts. And we got a few questions about how to support better relationships among siblings. I think it's really important to remember that conflict is a very natural part of social development, and especially for kids who are living under the same roof, sharing resources like parents, right? Like parents' time, attention. Sometimes it's the Xbox or the iPad or fill in the blank, right? They're competing for these resources some of the time. And so it's really, really natural that there is conflict. And in fact, it's very healthy to have conflict among siblings because our siblings are the first people who help us learn about give and take. And if we're lucky, about conflict resolution, right? If we are managing these situations. And so conflict is not a bad thing, but for siblings, it can be especially guilt-ridden if a sibling has a big fight with their brother or sister, maybe says some things they regret saying that they can't take back, or feeling really guilty about reactions or behaviors that they realize afterwards maybe were, not intentional on the part of the sib with a disability, and that maybe even some of the reasons they get frustrated are not within the control of the kiddo with a disability to change, right? And so guilt can be really, 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 really tough to deal with, but so, so important. Again, we could do a whole training on that. Unfortunately, we don't have time, but if you want to know more about guilt, reach out. Okay, pressure to achieve. I bet some of you have these little overachievers. I don't want to say overachievers, but these little achievers, right? Sort of the textbook sibling, gets really good grades, maybe does a lot of extracurricular activities, is really pleasant to be around, doesn't cause any problems, right? And I'll tell you that a lot of times parents of our achievers will say, oh, my kid doesn't need a sib shop, they're doing great. And I always kind of joke, no, those are the ones I worry the most about. And I'm kind of joking. I mean, I was that textbook overachieving sib. And I will tell you that the desire to achieve is really healthy and a really great thing until it's not, right? And so this is one of those areas that we want to make sure there's some balance, right? That there's a desire to achieve, a desire to excel that is not determining how that child creates their self-worth, right? That their self-worth, their idea of their value as a person is not tied to being perfect and not tied to always excelling, right? As parents and as people working with siblings, one of the greatest gifts that we can give to a sibling, a typically developing child of a kiddo with a disability, is to model what it's like to mess up and to survive and to be okay, right? And to validate it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to have a bad day, right? We're human beings. The last time I checked, perfection is not something that any of us can achieve or should strive to achieve, right? And so allowing a child to express and to experience that full range of feelings and situations, including when things don't go our way and how to handle that, is so, so important. And to recognize that this pressure to achieve is usually internal. There was a researcher named Sharon Coleman a number of years ago who did a study on 3 different groups of siblings of people with physical disabilities, siblings of people with cognitive disabilities, and siblings of people with no disabilities. And, the findings were really interesting. I think one of the most interesting findings of that study was related to this idea of this pressure to achieve. Because what Coleman found was that the siblings of people with disabilities, particularly the siblings of people with cognitive disabilities, for whatever reason, had the highest need to achieve. And that by and large, that need to achieve was internal. It was internally driven. It was not created by external pressure. And so it's really, really important to be aware of that with these kiddos who, you know, are doing so great, that the flip side of that might be that they're putting a tremendous amount of pressure on themselves, right? So how can we help relieve some of that pressure? And then last but not least, future concerns, which we've talked so much about already. The future concerns of siblings at different ages and stages, but just to be aware of that, and just to be aware of the need for siblings to kind of know what's going on and to sort of know what the next steps are. Because what we want to avoid is a situation in which we are now older adults. We have adult children with disabilities. They have adult siblings. Okay. And we're looking to the future, greater independence, hopefully, for the person with a disability, and also a time when maybe we can't provide the level of support that that person is getting now. If it is in our minds that siblings will somehow be part of that picture, if that's an outcome that we want, right? We want siblings to be lovingly involved in the care of their brothers and sisters for the rest of their lives, which I think is a goal that many of us have. It is so, so important to make sure that siblings have a voice and choices along the way, along that path. So it's not this thing that is suddenly sprung upon them with all of these assumptions having been made without really talking with the sibling to find out, well, what do you want for your future? And, you know, to encourage them to build that future so that they can come back and make choices to be involved in whatever ways they can. And I know that feels far away for many of you, but I promise you, having these little conversations at every transition point is going to pave a much smoother path towards the future. Because then, you know, the transition out of high school, for example, you know, and what happens then, it's not this big looming thing that, you know, we have no idea about, but we worry and we're not sure. It's the next natural step in the future planning process, and siblings are part of that. All right, let's flip the switch now and talk about opportunities, which are so, so important. And these are just a few of them. I'm sure that you could all think of additional silver linings that you experience as parents, but then also that your kiddos experience. Tolerance, right? For many siblings, most of us anyway, diversity training begins 365 days a year before breakfast. Right. And so we are natural born. I always say natural born social workers. Social work 101 is like meet people where they're at. Siblings are really, really good at that because siblings know what it's like to live with and love someone who is considered different. Right. And for many siblings, most siblings, difference is something they can accommodate very naturally. Right. Tolerance and the understanding that there's more than one way to be in this world and that that's okay. Advocacy. Siblings are natural born advocates. Insight. I often think of insight as wisdom, and I wish you could all be part of any number of sib shops that I've experienced where these young kids talk with such insight and perspective and wisdom about the human condition and about people. You know, they talk about, well, you know, what's important in a friend? Is a friend someone who uses the R word? Well, probably not, even if they're not talking about your sibling. You know, they talk about the difference between ignorance and stupidity. They talk about, you know, well, if someone is teasing your sib and they just don't know any better, they just don't really understand what's going on, you know, they just need to have someone explain it to them, right? That's more ignorance than anything. They just don't know. But if they're teasing your sibling and they know very well that they have a disability, well, that's just stupid. And that's not someone I want to be friends with, right? These are the things that regularly siblings come up with and say. They have such keen insight. Maturity, I think that those examples also demonstrate maturity. And I think that maturity can be also sort of the flip side of that increased responsibility, that siblings have. You know, many siblings talk about just having, you know, a different level of ability to cope with certain situations as a result of having a brother or sister with a disability. Humor, I think if you have a family member with a disability like I do, I think you might agree that we have a unique, if not slightly twisted sense of humor sometimes, right? I mean, think about the sometimes absurd situations we find ourselves in. And, you know, sometimes you just have to laugh because it's pretty funny. And humor, we know, is a great coping strategy. We know there's research on how laughter is good for our health, our social relationships. Vocation, the research confirms that it's not just me, many siblings find our way into helping professions, but not all, right? We also know of siblings who say, no, thanks, I had enough of that growing up. I'm going to go and make jewelry or whatever. And in fact, I have to say that a lot of these siblings who go into something completely different, they just can't help themselves. They still find ways to give back. We actually have a sibling in one of our online groups who owns a jewelry company that you've probably seen around, and she reached out to us and she said, I so appreciate being part of this sibling community. I want to design a bracelet for you guys and donate half the proceeds to the sibling support project, which was so lovely. But again, jewelry maker, not a social worker. Pride. Siblings take such great pride in the accomplishments of their brothers and sisters. In our Sib teen group, not too long ago, a sister posted and she said, my gosh, you guys, I'm so excited. I can't share this with any of my friends because they won't get it. My brother, who's 13, just learned how to tie his shoes, and I am so proud of him. He's been trying for so long, and I can't believe he finally did it. And of course, people responded and said, that's awesome. That's great. High five. Tell him good job. So tremendous pride in the accomplishments, great and small, of their brothers and sisters. Inspiration. You know, this is something I feel deeply every day when I think about my brother going out into a world which is not so friendly or accepting of people with disabilities. He goes out into that world every day and he makes the most of it, right? He doesn't mind or pay attention to those negative factors, right? He goes out every day and to me, that's very, very inspiring. Appreciation. I think sometimes parents especially worry, what is my kiddo going to say when I drop them off at the Sib shop? But I think those same parents would be really, really delighted to hear the gratitude and the appreciation that these young Sibs express in the Sib shop setting. This recognition that, you know what, my family's not perfect, no one's perfect, but I will say, my parents work so hard to make sure that me and my sister get what we need, right? They understand that you are juggling many balls and that some of those balls sometimes are made of glass, right? That there's a lot going on and how much they appreciate that. And then loyalty to their brothers and sisters. You know, we hear siblings say all the time, I don't have a typical relationship with my brother or sister like my friends have with their brothers and sisters, but it is really special. My Sib is my greatest fan. My Sib is always happy to see me when I come home. Loyalty so to their brothers and sisters, to their families, and to their friends, right? Siblings talk about how their brothers and sisters are kind of a litmus test for friends, maybe for partners in life, that depending on how they respond to their brothers and sisters, it says a lot about who they are as a person and whether or not they'd like to keep them around, right? And so once people pass that litmus test and earn that space in our lives, siblings are tremendously loyal to nurturing those relationships. Okay, so finally, what you've all been waiting for, now that we have an understanding of why it's so important to support siblings and what are some of the unique concerns and opportunities that siblings may experience, let's launch into the last part of our discussion, which is those 7 simple strategies for sibling support, and specifically how to minimize those concerns that we just talked about and maximize the opportunities that we just mentioned, okay? So the first thing I want to talk about, the first strategy, it ties back to that need for information that we talked about, okay? The number one way that the sibling experience parallels the parent experience, they need to have information. So the number one strategy is to provide siblings with information about the disability in age appropriate, and I should add culturally responsive ways, right? So there are many written forms of sharing information, okay? If you use a service provider, maybe for some kinds of therapies, it's really helpful if they have on their website a sort of kid-friendly page with information on it, not just for siblings, but for any kiddo in the community who might want to learn more about what they do. There are so many great books designed for kids and teens now that talk about different diagnoses, different disabilities. We have this amazing thing called the internet now, which is, you know, not something that we've had forever. It is easier than ever to find kid-friendly ways of sharing information about the disability. The other thing I want to point out that's so, so important is that you as parents, we talked about already, you have access to people, right? To professionals, to clinicians, experts, etc. We really, really encourage you to reach out to those providers and to ask if they could spend a little time with your other kiddo, maybe answering some questions, right? Maybe you have an occupational therapist, right? It's okay to say, hey, by the way, we're bringing Josh next week for therapy. His younger sister, Sarah, she's got some questions, you know, about what kinds of things you all do here. You know, she sees you with the equipment and thinks it looks really cool. Would you spend 10 minutes with her at the end of Josh's session and just kind of maybe answer her questions and kind of show her around a little bit? The not so great news, I always start with the bad news first, as you know. The not so great news is that not all professionals sort of think of doing this on their own as like a natural part of their practice. But the good news is we have yet to meet one who has refused. In fact, most of the time, the clinician will say, oh, yes, of course, Sarah has questions. I'd be happy to meet with her for 10 minutes next week and the week after that. And anytime she wants to chat, just give me a heads up and I'll set aside some time. So to give siblings those opportunities to have access to real people to answer real questions. Okay, strategy number 2. Can you guess what it is based on the picture? Strategy number 2 is provide siblings with opportunities to meet other siblings. Parents, think about this. Think about the role in your life that other parents play in terms of supporting you and being with you on your journey, right? For professionals, one of the first things we do with the parent of a newly diagnosed child is make sure that they have access to other parents, that they can connect with other parents to share resources, to validate each other's experiences, to help each other not feel so alone. Siblings benefit tremendously from being in community with other siblings. Of course, we know that sib shops are a great, time-tested, empirically informed way of doing that, model and format of doing that. We know that sib shops are really effective in helping siblings not only meet each other, but also talk about their experiences and do that in ways that feel really, really good. But sib shops are not the only way. And you guys are lucky because you have sib shops at Fairfax County Public Schools. But sib shops are not the only way. You know, if your child maybe receives services from a provider and that provider has maybe a holiday gathering or a family picnic or something, why not suggest carving out time to do an activity for the siblings, right? Maybe if there's a buddy walk, maybe there's a sibling team and they get together and they fundraise together and they walk together and they hang out together and they paint signs and make t-shirts or whatever it is, right? So think about that as a parent. If you're scheduling maybe play dates for your kiddo with a disability, so important, maybe see if there's a sibling who could possibly have a play date with your other kiddo while that play date is happening, right? So think about ways for your child to connect with other siblings. So, so important. Strategy number 3 is going to be related to communication, I think, based on this picture. Yes, it is. Encourage good communication with typically developing children. Well, thank you very much. What does good communication look like? The million-dollar question. So at the Sibling Support Project, we really appreciate the principles of active listening. Now, if you're involved in a parent-to-parent program, you've probably even had a training in active listening. If you have read a book called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk, you know a lot about active listening. That is a book that has been around for decades. It's been a New York Times bestseller time and time again. It's been translated into several languages. It is a crash course in active listening. How to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk. And I'm just going to give you the cliff notes here on the principles of active listening. It's very simple, and it's something that you can do every single day in every one of your relationships, and especially with your kiddos, especially with the siblings in your families. Active listening goes such a long way. And the idea is that when your child is talking to you about anything, you are really present. And so through verbal and nonverbal cues, you're demonstrating that you are actively listening to what they're saying. Okay. So nonverbal cues include making eye contact with them as they're talking with you. Maybe you are sitting down or making sure you're eye level with them so that you can hear them and that you're really in their space. Nodding, right? That's another nonverbal cue, as well as verbal cues. For example, asking questions. Oh, wow, that sounds really interesting. Tell me more about that. Or, oh, that sounds embarrassing. What happened next? Right? To ask questions that indicate to the child not only that you heard what they said, but you're really interested in knowing more, right? Tell me more. Verbal cues can also be kind of recapping what they say. Oh gosh, so what you're saying is that when that happened on the playground, it made you really uncomfortable. Oh, I can totally relate to that. Validate, validate, validate. Oh, I can understand why that felt so uncomfortable. Yeah, I would feel uncomfortable too. And I will tell you that if you forget everything I've said today and you remember one thing, I want it to be this. The most impactful way that you can support your kiddo and the siblings in your life is by hearing them, making them know that they are heard, and also validating them. And the validation is so key, right? Especially if they're sharing something that might be really hard to share and that might be a little bit scary. For example, I really get embarrassed when my brother does X, Y, or Z. Or, oh, sometimes I hate my sister. Sometimes I wish my sister didn't exist, right? Those are big feelings. And I think as adults, sometimes we shy away from them. And rather than shy away from them, it's so important to lean in and to validate and to say, you know what? I can understand why sometimes you want your sister to disappear. I get it. Now, we're not, condoning it or saying that we also wish that that child would disappear. Of course not, right? We're validating this is a big feeling you're having, and I can understand why you feel that way. Because I'll tell you what, there's nothing worse than having these big, sometimes not great feelings then also feeling wrong for feeling them, right? I'll tell you a personal story from my own childhood. Well, it's probably more in the tween teen years. Maybe I was 13. Anyone who's ever been a 13-year-old girl, you know what I'm talking about. And I was having a full-blown meltdown about something my brother did. And I was really, really angry and sobbing and yelling. And I yelled to, my mom was with me, and I was said, Mom, it's just not fair. It's just not fair. And, rather than sort of coddle me and try to convince me that it was fair, my mother did the best thing ever. She said, you know what, Emily, you're right. It is not fair. And that really stinks. The world we live in is not a fair place, and I wish it was. Well, that took the wind out of my sails, but also it's something that I remember to this day because it was honest, and it validated how I was feeling, right? I felt validated in that moment. And because I felt validated, I was able to move through that feeling. And that's really what we want to help our kids do. Understand our feelings, accept our feelings, right? And move through them. So, encourage good communication with typically developing children. There it is. Now, strategy number 4. This is the part in the presentation where people get a little bit, I don't know, maybe a little bit perturbed. Encourage parents. So I'm encouraging you to set aside special time with siblings. Why do people get a little bit annoyed about this one? Well, because does anyone here in this webinar feel that you have enough time in the day to do all the things you want to do? Anyone? I can't see you, but I feel like probably there are no hands raised, even if I could see you. No, because none of us feels that we have enough time, enough hours in the day to do everything we want to do. And so this one can feel especially challenging for parents because I know how much time and energy you're devoting to caring for your child with a disability. And I know it's not easy. And I know that there are days that you wish that you could just have a day off, right? A day off from everything. Maybe you could go, I don't know, sit in a hot tub or take a walk or do a hike, or I don't know what you would do. I would probably sit on a beach if the weather was nice, right? We all would like to have more time to not only do the things we need to do, but to also do nothing, right? And so when we talk about setting aside special time with our typically developing kids, the most important thing I want you to remember is that for siblings, a little goes a long way. Okay. And child development experts will tell you this, that in terms of supporting a kiddo and letting a kiddo know that you care and that they're loved, the most important and impactful way to do that is through small, consistent gestures, small, consistent actions. It's not the big trips to Disney, although I'm sure that your child really does love that also. But it's those little things we do every day to show that we care. And for siblings, this is especially true. So let me give you some very concrete examples. We've heard from siblings who say, well, my mom would take my brother to therapies 2 times a week, and I would get to go along. And while that therapy was happening, we would hang out in the car, listen to podcasts, or maybe go get an ice cream or run to Starbucks. We could talk about what was going on at school or with my friends or with my brother, or we could just not talk at all, but it was my time. I knew that I had that 50 minutes twice a week to be with my parent. For me, it was very similar growing up. It was actually 15 minutes, even less, but it was 15 minutes every Friday on the way to pick up dinner, takeout, and 15 minutes on the way home with my mom. It was my favorite 30 minutes of the week because I had my mom all to myself. And we would talk about everything or nothing. We would just listen to the radio, which, by the way, is what we did in the old days. We listened to the car radio before we had all these streaming services. But anyway, I've also heard we've heard siblings say, growing up, my parents would let me stay up an extra 20 minutes after they put my sibling to bed. And in that 20 minutes, we could work on a puzzle or watch part of a show or talk, but or read. We would read together. It was my time every night, 20 minutes after they put my sib to bed, that I knew that I had their undivided attention. Some parents will talk about keeping a journal, and they'll use this journal to create time together when there's no time to be together because we're all so busy. And so in this journal, they might write a note to their kiddo. Hey, just thinking of you. How did your math quiz go today? What do you want to do this weekend? Right? And they maybe will leave that journal on the child's pillow and invite that kiddo to write back when they can about anything. And it's not a deadline. It doesn't have to be done by 7 p.m. on Tuesday or whatever. It's not homework, but it's another vehicle for communication and to create that time when you're thinking of each other and communicating with each other. It's also really nice for siblings who might feel a little bit hesitant or shy to verbalize what they're experiencing. It might be easier for them to write it down. So that journal is a really, really nice thing that we've heard. And then finally, I know that there's not enough respite services in the world. I wish there was so much more, but think about utilizing respite services to not only, maybe have a date night with your partner, but also maybe to spend some time, set aside some time to do something really fun with sibs, with the siblings in your family. And think about errands too. I've also heard siblings say, oh, every Saturday morning, my dad and I would go grocery shopping, which sounds like it could be boring, but it was always fun. He would get me a donut or, whatever it is. So even on sort of those mundane errands, think about like, can I bring my other kiddo along and sort of turn this into a special time for us to spend together? So remember, a little goes a long way. Okay, strategy number 5. We're in the home stretch here. Learn more about life as a sibling. I'm so glad that you all are here today to learn how to support siblings. There's a lot of great information out there that will help you learn even more about common sibling experiences. There are so many books. You can come to our website and look at our publications page. There's some recommended readings. There are so many films and movies now out there that deal with sibling topics. Wonder I'm sure many of you have seen this movie. Wonder is one that really, I think, addresses sibling issues and portrays sibling issues. There are, so many others. So it's really, really helpful to understand common sibling experiences. And, we do adult sibling panels all the time as part of our trainings and as part of our education. I really encourage you all, maybe the folks who are hosting this webinar today, maybe would be interested in offering an adult sibling panel. That is one of the most powerful ways to learn about sibling experiences, by hearing from adult siblings who reflect back upon their experiences growing up, especially for parents. It's a really, really powerful way to understand sibling issues. And, talk to your kids too. Learn more about their lives, right? And who they are and what they're thinking about. And I also love, I want to sort of point this out. I think it's really important to ask open-ended questions when you are talking with your typically developing kiddo. Okay. I want to give one example that comes up a lot, and it's around this idea of helping. We even had a question about this submitted ahead of time. So often we turn to the typically developing sib in the family to either sort of help with maybe social modeling, or if the child with a disability is having a meltdown in a classroom, sometimes it's the sib who's called to the classroom to help kind of relieve that situation. And it's understandable, right? It's understandable that siblings are often turned to as helpers. And the truth of it is, don't we all love helping? Like, it feels really good to help other people, doesn't it? And that is true for siblings as well. On many levels, it feels great to be the one could come into the classroom and help relieve that situation, right? To be able to have that impact, to make a situation easier or better, right? That feels really, really good. But there are also other feelings and realities that can come up as a result of that situation, right? That child is missing time in their own classroom, right? That child feels a duty or an obligation, right? That child doesn't really have a choice in the matter or doesn't feel like they have a choice. And so when I talk about the importance of asking open-ended questions, this is a situation that it's really, really easy to give an example. So I think very often when we notice a child being helpful, right, being that little helper for their brother or sister, it is our inclination to say, wow, you really help your sibling so much. That's amazing. You're such a good sibling, right? And we place a value on that. Instead, I invite parents and others to think about maybe approaching that sibling differently and instead saying, wow, you help out your sibling a lot. What is that like for you? Because that invites the possibility that it's not just one thing. And it helps the kiddo really think about, oh, well, sometimes it feels good, feels really good, but it's also hard because then, sometimes I miss my math lesson or whatever. So to just kind of think about open-ended questions, because I think that too often as parents, we don't ask the question because we're already assuming what the answer is. We're placing our own values and worry and whatever on that answer. We're reflecting our own feelings onto what we think the child is going to say. And by asking open-ended questions, it's really, really helpful. And it helps you sort of look and get a view and get a perspective on the thoughts and feelings of your kiddo, right? Without sort of leading them in any direction. What is that like for you? Or, oh, wow, that was a big blow up that we just had with your sib. He was really mad about something. What was that like for you? Right. So in the spirit of learning more about life as a sibling and learning more about the life of the sibling in your family, to ask those open-ended questions. Okay, strategy number 6, the crystal ball we must be talking about. Yes, the future. Excuse me. So we have talked a lot about this today, and it's not by accident, right? Future planning is one of the biggest issues that comes up for adult siblings, and it's something that we want to start changing those patterns when our kids are young, when siblings are young, and making sure that we're including our kiddos in conversations about transitions, right, and the future. So ideally, what we really are aiming for is a situation in which if your child says to you, mom, dad, caregiver, whoever, when I grow up, I want my brother Peter to live with me. We want parents to feel very comfortable and very confident in saying, you know what, Emily, if that's what you want when you're older, and if that's what Peter wants when he's older, then we will support that 100%. But if for whatever reason that is not what you want, and that's not what Peter wants, we're going to have other choices. We're going to have other options. We're working now to make sure that there are other choices available to you. And we want you to be part of those conversations. And we want you to understand what those plans are and what those choices could be, right? We want to know as you get older and as things change for you and as things change for Peter, what is possible and what each of you wants, because that might change, right? And then last but not least, our number 7 strategy to remember, drum roll please, the single strongest factor affecting siblings' interpretations of disability is, you guessed it, the parent's interpretation of the disability. So if as a parent, you decide that this disability, this is the greatest tragedy to befall your family, chances are your other kiddos are going to feel the same way. If, on the other hand, you decide, well, it wasn't plan A, but now that we're here, we're going to meet the situation with as much grace and humor as possible, we have every reason to expect that your kiddos will follow suit, right? Maybe not every single day, and maybe not at certain stages of life, right? But at the end of the day, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree with us. And that the way we approach the situation and the way we model meeting the situation and addressing the situation is very much the way that our kids will follow suit. You guys are so important in setting the tone in your families. You know that. You guys are the sun and the moon and the stars in your family. And so your kiddos really look to you to set that tone. All right, that is the end of my formal presentation. I would love to take some questions, and I hope you do have some questions. And then the other thing on this slide is our website, siblingsupport.org. Really encourage you to check it out. Some of our other resources, upcoming events, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, thank you so much, Emily, for this very informative presentation. We have enjoyed all the information that you shared, and we have learned a lot. And you have actually done an emphasis on how we should be, taking care of those siblings who actually go through a lot, and we need to offer them the help and support needed without forgetting what they really need and how they feel. So we didn't have a lot of questions. Most of the questions that came for us were mostly about the specific SIP shop that FCPS offers. So I was able to reply to those questions. But I have seen in the registration form a very interesting question, which was about how can I explain the balance that is needed between the siblings. The neurotypical child does not understand and thinks that her brother gets away with things, and it isn't fair.
Yes. And that, that's something that we talked about in the presentation, that idea of fairness. And it's so important. I mean, fairness is something that's really important for all children. Like I'll just give you an example from my own life. I have two boys, they're ages 12 and 8.5. And if I give each of them a chocolate chip cookie after dinner, you better pray for me that each chocolate chip cookie is the exact same size and has the same number of chocolate chips, because they are each looking at their brother's cookie to make sure that he didn't get a better one. So fairness is a really, really important theme for kids in general, and for siblings especially. Siblings are often pretty accurate and unsentimental assessors of the abilities of their brothers and sisters, and they know kind of what their brothers and sisters can and can't do, and when they are getting away with things that that they should not necessarily get away with. And so that is a very common thing, that siblings feel that, their brother and sister gets away with everything because they have a disability. And so I think it's really important for parents, as parents, to kind of take a step back and check ourselves and sort of think about the situation and think about giving the sibling the benefit of the doubt, right? I know it's kind of our instinct to sort of defend and protect our child with disabilities naturally. But to think about in this dynamic where your kids are peers, they know each other in ways, they have different perspectives on each other in ways that we don't as parents, and to just think about them as peers and on a more equal playing field, right? And that, maybe there are some things that happen, maybe there, that aren't fair, right? We talked about that earlier, and life isn't fair. So to maybe instead address, well, what upsets you about that? Why is that upsetting to you? Like, you're right, it isn't fair. Like, he doesn't have to do as much around the house because whatever. His mobility isn't that great, for example. He can't vacuum the way you can vacuum because his mobility is different. So to really give the child space to kind of talk about why that's hard and why that stinks so much, right? And to just really validate that, right? Like, you're right, it's not fair. And I'm sorry, I wish it was more fair. So I think validation is super, super important. And to also, again, just sort of give the kiddo the benefit of the doubt in as many situations as possible, to not automatically jump to the assumption. And this is what I was going to say. If there is especially a conflict between kids, and maybe one of the kids is even getting like physically hurt, I think so often it's natural for us as parents to say, "Oh, honey, he didn't mean it. It was just because of his disability, right? He didn't mean to do this. He can't help it." That might be true, but let's not discount the impact on the sibling, right? Like, maybe your brother didn't mean it, but I know it still hurt, and I'm really sorry that happened to you. And I know that wasn't fair, and I'm sorry. You're right. That was wrong. That should not have happened, and I'm sorry it did. To validate as much as possible. I do see a question from Katie. Oh, I think you might have answered this. Oh, about does the child with a disability have to be diagnosed? Okay.
Yes, but if you would like to reply to that one so everyone can hear the answer, because we still have a couple of minutes to be able to reply to that question, it will be great.
Sure. So Katie asks, for the SIB shop, does the child need to be officially diagnosed for the sibling to attend SIB shops? And so Amal's answer was no. I mean, and every SIB shop is a little bit different, but we agree that no, not necessarily. You don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis. We know that sometimes the road to a diagnosis can be kind of a long and bumpy road, an experience. The question is, and this comes up a lot too, by the way, from parents who say like, well, I have two kids with disabilities. One is more impacted by the disability. The other one, has sort of mild disabilities. Can the child with mild disabilities attend the SIB shop? And the answer is really the same here for in both situations. If the kiddo is not diagnosed, or maybe the sibling has a little diagnosis, we always want to think about, first of all, the kiddo in question, the sibling who you're thinking about sending to the SIB shop, are they experiencing things, issues that are consistent with the reasons we want kids to come to SIB shops, right? Are they expressing, maybe your kiddo doesn't have a diagnosis, but there are behaviors and there's a dynamic in the family that it's like, oh no, a SIB shop would really be helpful for my kiddo, right? Because these are the issues that they're facing. You don't need to have a full diagnosis, right, to experience some of the same issues. Same if you have a child with a mild disability. Are they experiencing the issues that are consistent with the reasons we want to bring kids to SIB shops? Are they having sibling experiences for which SIB shops might be helpful? Are they able to participate in the activities? Do they do well in group settings? SIB shops are not going to be every kiddo's cup of tea, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, can the kiddo take from the SIB shop what we want them to take from it, right? And then also, if it's the case of a kiddo having a disability, maybe they have, autism, and they're not as impacted by their autism as their sister who has autism, right, at home. How are they going to feel if we're having a group discussion in the SIB shop about autism, and some of the kids are going to say, oh, I hate autism because it means my brother does this, this, and this, right? How is that child going to feel having their own diagnosis of autism? Are they able to separate that and say, well, I'm me, and this, they're not talking about me, they're talking about, their brothers and sisters. So there are a lot of things to consider, but we would not automatically exclude a child who has their own diagnosis just based on the fact that they have a diagnosis, right? We need to ask a lot more questions. So that was two answers in one for a question that wasn't even asked. But
Well, thank you so much for replying to that question. We have one last question I hope we'll be able to reply to. My two affected kids have a fatal disease that currently does not have a cure, so their future is uncertain. We have hope that a treatment or cure could happen in the next decade or so, but that's not a guarantee. Do you have ideas on how to plan for the future with their siblings in that situation?
yeah, absolutely. It's really important to be very honest in your conversations with your kiddos. And that is something that's really hard for us as adults, because I think we feel the weight of a life-limiting illness. We understand what that means in ways that kids maybe don't. And so we carry a certain weight with that, and a certain heaviness with that. And at the same time, it's really important for your other kiddos to be prepared. And so future planning in general, as I said before, I think of sort of like bite size, like one foot in front of the other, which when you think about that as a metaphor, it's really, really great. Like you're literally just taking one step after the next. And so while the future, the big future, we don't know how long that future is going to be, but let's make sure that we're including the whole family in conversations about what our next steps are going to be. Because the truth is, there might be more questions than answers right now. And the important thing is that you speak openly with your kiddos, enable them to ask questions, provide the space to ask questions, and be as straightforward and honest as possible. I have done some research on this topic, and there's a researcher named Barbara Sorkes, Sourkes. I think she's at Stanford right now, and she's done a lot of research on children with life-limiting illnesses, and she's done some research on siblings. And one of the things that really struck me when I read her work was the number of times, the frequency of having a situation where parents aren't even talking to the child who has the life-limiting illness about the fact that they have a life-limiting illness, right? And what that means. And she does all these case studies with these kiddos who know exactly what the situation is and think it's strange that no one's talking to them about it. So I encourage you, I first of all, just want to hold space for you and just wrap my arms around you. That is a really, really challenging situation. And I think you'll also find some relief in being able to be honest with your kiddos and not hold this all in such a way that you feel like you have to change it or fix it or make it something it's not for your other kiddos. I think there will be relief in going through this all together, but also understanding that they're kids and they let go of things much more easily than we do, right? So to just ask those open-ended questions and enable them to participate as much or as little as they want to.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. And unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time today. So I will encourage you all to communicate with the Family Resource Center if you need some resources, because we may have some children books that could be helpful in this specific case that we just talked about, and how to, talk to your kids about their illnesses and all of those, and grief and all of those, valuable resources. And also we will be sending all of you the recording and the presentation along with some previous resources that we have offered with the Family Resource Center. And also we will be sending the registration link for the upcoming SIP shop. So please, wait for that email. And when it comes, make sure that you also fill out the evaluation form, because your opinion and your feedback is very important for us, so we can do better and we can offer more in the future. Thank you so much, Emily, for being with us today. And thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.